And we are recording. Hello, everyone. Hello, dress casual fans. We are here with the masked saint himself, also known as the Saint, Mr. Chris Whaley, Dr. Chris Whaley, Pastor Chris Whaley. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Dylan, it is great to be with you, man. I've looked forward to this for a long time.
As have I. We have a mutual friend in Rena Friedman Watts of the Better Call Daddy podcast, and I was very fortunate to have her recommend you to me. So, shout out to her as well and her podcast.
Yeah, Rena is awesome. I just think the world of her.
Oh, she's great. We did an episode together and it was fantastic. And she's so nice. Her family's so nice. I know you had an opportunity to speak with at least one of her children. I believe her young boy.
Yeah, actually, my wife is a former high school math teacher, and my wife is tutoring her son Rafi by Zoom. They meet periodically, and she tutors him.
Oh, okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, her daughter actually wrote a children's book for my. She knew my wife was pregnant at the time with my daughter right now, who is 2 years old, and her little daughter wrote a book for my daughter. So we still have it, and that's something I'll always cherish.
That's awesome. That sounds just like them.
So you are on your way to North Carolina to meet up with a buddy, and then you're headed to Ohio. What's going on in Ohio?
They have these events with former wrestlers and even current wrestlers. There's a lot of wrestling fans all over the all over the country, and this event's going to have probably 20 really big names there. A couple of them I'll mention: Kurt Angle, former gold medal winner in the Olympics, and also with world champion in professional wrestling.
Did it with a
Uh,
broken freaking neck.
yeah, Rob Van Dam,
Oh wow.
a great former tag team, Rock and Roll Express, the fantastic good friend of mine, Steve Kern, who worked as Skinner. He also worked as Doink the Clown, and just a bunch more. So you have a table, and fans come by and they buy your books and your pictures and your T-shirts, and you take pictures with them and you hear their stories, and it's a great thing. I love doing those, so I'm looking forward. That's going to be in Chillicothe, Ohio, on Saturday.
Okay. Do you happen to know the name of the event so we can shout that out there?
It's called Reunion 3 or Cavalcade of
Okay.
Legends.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, have you hung out with Rob Van Dam before?
No, really. He got into business long after I did. He was trained by a really good friend of mine, Dory Funk Jr.
Okay.
Uh, the last time I saw him was at the um Cauliflower Alley in Las Vegas a couple of years ago. He was honored at the Cauliflower Alley and he spoke, but I'm not really friends with him.
Well, the reason I ask is I know he's in another business as well these days. I believe anyway. He still grows cannabis, and the only reason I
Yeah,
bring that up is because I know a lot of athletes and particularly wrestlers have had issues with the like OxyContin painkillers such as that. And
yeah,
I
yeah.
know cannabis can be a nice alternative. So I think that's really cool that a guy like him and maybe some other wrestlers are getting involved with that sort of activity to help these guys out and not have to deal with the painkillers and things like that. I know
Yeah,
you had. I know, oh, sorry about that.
no, go ahead.
Well, I know you had experience with the Von Erich, so I didn't know if maybe you had some personal stories about that as well. That maybe some sad stories of guys using substances that were life lessons for you.
You know, I I have started watching this. I I have some friends that have some pretty tragic stories. There's a thing on Vice Channel called the Dark Side of the Ring,
Yep.
and you know, I, you'd just be amazed. Just about all of them, the dark side of it, where they had issues with drugs and stuff like that, and it's just a real shame. I know Theo Vaughn was interviewing Hulk Hogan uh, I forget how long ago it was. I was listening to that interview, and Hulk Hogan said that, any year you probably have, uh, 10 football players who die, but just so many of those guys. And Hulk Hogan said that any year, you probably have 10 or 12 football players who die, maybe 5 or 6 hockey players, maybe, 10 or 15 basketball players, but over 300 wrestlers, professional wrestlers, die every year. Um,
Wow.
it's a pretty rough lifestyle. Um, you know, when I was in the business, there I got started. There were like 26 territories all over the United States. And then the WWF kind of took over because they took it national and international, and the
Yeah.
territories couldn't compete with that. And so it shut them down. And then all of the talent went to WWF and also WCW, which had national broadcast. But now, there's probably 1,000 independent wrestling organizations all over the nation, and um, you have a lot of guys that are trying to make it as professional wrestlers, and it just changed. The dynamics have changed tremendously, and those guys want to do anything and everything to get noticed, and so they do crazy stuff, off of the top ropes, onto tables, onto light bulbs and the thumbtacks and all kinds of crap like that. And I'm just glad that, I was in wrestling during my era instead of this era.
Oh yeah, sorry. I think I lost you there for just a moment, but yeah, the guys aren't doing more crazy stuff. I know you've mentioned you met Mick Foley before, and he really sticks
Yeah.
out to me as someone who used to put his body on the line a lot.
Yeah. He's a lot like, well, Dillon, I love it when I go and speak, and afterwards people come up and talk to me and ask me questions. And, usually Bubba will always come up and say, that wrestling was all fake, wasn't it? And it's kind of crazy. I tell people I had a crushed ankle. I had 5 knee surgeries, both ACLs, MCLs, 2 lateral releases. I've had both my hips dislocated so many times they come out. Broke pelvis. I broke all my ribs, my sternum, both collarbones. I've had both shoulders surgically repaired. Neck injuries. I've had over 100 concussions, and it's difficult for me to get up off the floor. And I've heard Nick Foley say that, it's hard for him to play with his kids on the floor too, because once you get down, it's hard to get up. But that's just part of the business. You deal with injuries.
Oh yeah, and a quick shout out to my hometown of Cortland. I believe Mick Foley went to Cortland State, so I just wanted to get that in there. Um, so I mean, geez, with all those injuries, you must know your doctor pretty well.
Yeah, God blessed me with a very high tolerance to physical pain. So pain has not really been a problem for me to deal with. I have a lot more trouble with emotional pain than I do with physical pain. So I'm very blessed with that. And I've never taken anything for any of my surgeries, any of my injuries. I've never taken one pain pill.
Yeah, I was listening to one of the podcasts that you were on. I believe you said you were 5'10", 225 when you started wrestling.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a that's a pretty sturdy. I mean, that's an NFL running back type size right there.
Well, I was in great shape in those days, and I look at my picture that I'll be selling on Saturday, and I tell people that's before gravity got a hold of me. Uh, uh, but
And which is actually kind of surprising because you talk about how you were kind of a sickly kid, right? I mean, the movie portrays you as a very small boy. You were getting picked on at the very beginning of the movie, so it's kind of a surprise that you were able to get that large, right?
It really was. I was constantly in and out of the hospital as a kid. They couldn't figure out really what was wrong with me. And then in the fourth grade, I had polio and viral encephalitis. I was in the hospital for 3 months. Had to learn how to walk all over again. And I had a great doctor who would not give up, and they sent me to a large clinic in Central Florida. They finally found out that I was allergic to just about everything.
Yeah.
And so they put me on these shots, allergy shots, that I took right off the bat. I was taking them every day, and then they kind of narrowed it down to a couple times a week, and then once a week, and then once a month. I took them until I was a junior in college. And then, but when I started taking these shots, the amazing thing was my body started to change, and I started putting on weight. And my doctor was the one that got me going to the gym, working out with weights. And before you know it, I just really enjoyed going to the gym, working with the weights, and my body changed, dramatically. And then when I was a kid in the hospital, uh, you get your days and nights mixed up, and late at night, just about the only thing on TV in those days was professional wrestling. And so I got hooked on it as a kid, growing up watching Eddie Graham and the Great Malenko and Red Bastien, Johnny Valentine, and all those old greats. I just loved it. And so when my wife and I were married and living in Central Florida, and she was teaching school at her alma mater, and I was waiting to be called by a church. I picked up the Tampa Tribune one day, and there was an ad that said wanted professional wrestlers. And I jumped up out of my seat and took it over to my wife, who was grading papers, showed it to her, and she kind of rolled her eyes and kept grading papers. But I packed a bag and I drove over to Tampa, walked into the gym, and there was the villain that I had watched as a child, the Great Malenko. And so I was trained by the Great Malenko, and I loved it from the moment that I walked into the gym to the first time I got into the ring. I loved everything about professional wrestling, and it's just something that I had 10 great years of doing it and missed it tremendously once I quit.
And now you said you didn't play organized sports in high school, right? Because of the illnesses?
Right, right. Yeah. And my high school didn't have wrestling.
Okay.
So, yeah, they had football, they had baseball and basketball, and that was about it.
And you met your wife in college.
Actually, I met my wife when I was 16 years old,
Oh, okay.
and we met in church, as a matter of fact. And she was planning to go to college, and neither one of my family, neither one of my folks had any education. My dad had a third grade education. My mom had a seventh grade education. So education was not pushed in my household. But she was a young lady who knew what she wanted to do. She wanted to be a teacher, and so I followed her to college. I never planned to go to college, but I followed her, and that's where my life changed. I became a Christian when I was a freshman in college, and suddenly I had a desire to learn, and I just did very well. I was a great student, loved studying, graduated from Palm Beach Atlantic University in South Florida. And my wife and I got married my junior year in college. And we have been married almost 49 years.
Wow. Well, congratulations on that.
Yeah, yeah. She's a great girl.
That's fantastic. The wind beneath your wings is something very important.
Yeah.
Um, Now, it is interesting to me that you didn't become very religious until meeting her because you say your mom was a Jehovah's Witness, correct?
Yes, she was. She was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. My dad was a fifth degree redneck. He wasn't anything. He he wasn't a church-going guy at all. But my mom had a lot of questions about Jehovah's Witnesses, and she would ask her dad questions, and he refused to answer. He said, "That's not for you to know."
Mm.
She got married very young, and my dad moved to Central Florida. He was a long-distance truck driver, and so they moved to Central Florida. And when he was on a trip one time, uh, and he would be gone for a month at a time,
Yeah.
there was a local pastor knocking on doors, and he knocked on our door, and my mom said, "I've been praying for somebody like you for a long time." And she invited him in, asked a lot of questions, and he answered them. And my mom changed. She became a Christian, was excommunicated by by the Jehovah's Witnesses and her family.
Mm.
Uh, and she was the beginning of the spiritual heritage of our family, and I'm very thankful for my mom. She passed away in January of 2021, but she was a great influence in my life.
Oh wow, that is interesting because I mean I'll plant a flag in this on the 2021 thing, but yeah, that is interesting as far as the impact on your life. Now, just out of curiosity, with with the Jehovah's Witness, and I'm sorry, I'm stumbling over my words here. I always get nervous excitement when I'm talking to a guest. Um, with the Jehovah's Witness, is it only the men that go out door to door, or do women do that as well?
Oh no, men and women and children. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
okay, because I've only
yeah.
ever seen the young men, so I wasn't sure.
No, no, men and women and children. Sometimes you have two women, sometimes you have two men, sometimes a man and a woman, usually a husband and a wife, or a dad and a daughter. Uh,
Okay,
usually, usually one of them is a full-fledged Jehovah's Witness, and the other one is usually a trainee. So
gotcha.
uh,
Okay.
if they come to my door, I do all my talking to the trainee to try to talk them out of it.
And now, are you an only child?
No, I have a sister who is 10 years younger than I am.
Okay.
So
In the
just
movie, I'm sorry about that.
no, go ahead.
Well, in the movie, it opens up and your parents are having an argument, and your father walks out the door, and it's kind of a very, it's an interesting thing because your father walks out of an argument with your mother, but he turns around and tells you not to give your mother any grief. So you kind of feel this interesting sympathy there for that relationship. Is that something that you wrote in the book as well, or was that strictly for the film?
No, they took some liberties with the movie. No, my mom and dad were married for 64 years.
Okay.
So no, I don't know why they did that for the movie, but my dad was a hard character during my childhood. My dad uh, became a Christian when I was a little boy, which was one of the things that convinced me the reality of Christianity, because I said if God could change my dad, he could change anybody.
Yeah.
Because he was a barroom brawler, rough guy. He was 6 feet something and probably weighed 240 pounds. He was a brute of a man,
Wow.
and when he became a Christian, his life changed dramatically, and it just wasn't the same guy that I grew up with. His life really changed, and he became a different guy. He wasn't the greatest of dads when I was a little boy, but he was a tremendous grandfather to both of my girls, and he was just a great guy.
It's funny how that works out. I mean, I can't complain about my own parents, but I've heard them talk about their parents and how they changed very much so as grandparents.
Right, right.
Now, even just the process of writing the book. I mean, I apologize, I haven't purchased it yet, but I'm sure I will after seeing the movie. How did you? I find it so hard when writing anything, whether it's a book or a short story or a speech you want to give. Just to start, how did you decide to start the book, and what was that process like?
Well, I was a big fan of Michael Landon, the Little House on the Prairie series and Highway to Heaven. They just don't put a lot of good stuff on TV these days.
Right.
And once I went to my, well, I need to back up. When I retired from wrestling at the age of 33 and went to my first church. And when I went to the church, I started dealing with some people who were being abused, and I began to deal with some people more as a professional wrestler than as a pastor. The first one was a lady, a precious lady with kids, and she was being abused by her husband. And when I found out about it, I went to their house and I called him out. I said, I came to see how you do against somebody who was able to fight back. Anybody that would hit a woman is a dirtbag. And a bully only picks on people that he knows that he can defeat.
Right.
So, come on out and let's see how you do against somebody who's able to fight back. And that was really, that was the beginning of the Masked Saint, because that's when I started dealing with people, uh, that were unsavory as a professional wrestler than as a pastor. So I had all of these episodes, and Michael Landon died, and no longer, the Little House on the Prairie. You can see it in reruns, and Highway to Heaven. You can see it in reruns, but I just don't find anything very worthy of watching on TV. The mainstream programs that they put on always shows the dad as some kind of bumbling fool, the mother is promiscuous, and the children are usually, rebellious
Yep.
and delinquent. Um, but Michael Landon, he portrayed a great family, and the pastor wasn't a crook like most shows usually show.
Yeah.
And I said all of these things that happened to me, boy, this would make a great series. And so I need to write a book, and I didn't think I was a writer, and I tried to find a ghostwriter, and I wasn't able to do that. So my wife said, you do it. And one Saturday I sat down at my, personal computer and got the word processor, and I started writing, and I showed it to my wife, and she said, that's great, keep going. And so the reason it was so easy to write, Dillon, is because each chapter is an actual episode of my life. And so, it's easy to write about something that happened to you. So that's all I did. I just sat down and started writing about all these episodes that happened to me and put it into a book. And after, getting it published, that was another episode that I really struggled with, but finally got it published. And wasn't long after it was published that I got a call from a movie producer, and started that process. And then after, a year or so, I finally had a producer who said, hey, we're going to make it into a movie. And it was just amazing how fast time flew by.
Is writing something you enjoyed as a kid?
Oh, no, I did not. I did not. But now I do. I wrote a second book. Once you've written a book and it's been made into a movie, you kind of get spoiled. And so
I
I
imagine.
I say, if I wrote a book, what would have the best chance of being made into a movie? And I had a great idea for a Christmas story, and my wife and I watched those stupid Hallmark movies, Christmas movies. So I said, that's it. I'll write a Christmas book. I got in touch with my feminine side, and I wrote a Christmas book, and I enjoyed writing that. And then a wrestling buddy that I got into wrestling with 40 years ago, we wrote a book together. It's my last book, which was just released. It's called Mr. President,
Okay.
and it's about the world heavyweight wrestling champion becoming president of the United States and putting his wrestling buddies in his cabinet and turning Washington upside down. So I already know the next book I'm writing, and I know the next one I'm writing. So now I just, I really enjoy sitting down and writing. I really enjoy it.
That's fantastic. Wow, I love hearing that. Now with the Mr. President book, I know that the part of the, if I'm understanding it correctly, the way I heard it was that originally the president is a comedian.
No, 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 no. It parallels two lives.
Okay.
You have a sleazy comedian. He's a womanizer, drinker, smoker, and came from the bad side of the tracks, and he becomes more and more known. And one night he's got a heckler in the audience who's a military guy, and so there's a thing about, well, maybe I should run for president, and then he starts doing that. He runs for president every 4 years, and he gets autographs from celebrities, but unbeknownst to the celebrities, they're actually signing an agreement to be his vice presidential candidate. And so he gets an autograph from the world heavyweight champion, and so the champion actually signed an agreement to be his vice presidential candidate. And then there's a big scandal with the Democrats and the Republicans. I know that's shocking.
Right.
And the comedian wins the presidency, and while he's making his acceptance speech, he has a heart attack, which thrusts the world heavyweight champion into the presidency. And that's as far as I'll go. But it is a political comedy, and it is hilarious. It's funny. Every time I reread it, I mean, I crack myself up, even though I know what's coming. It's still funny.
And I think just from what I've seen online, there's a huge crossover between the comedy world and the wrestling world. So I think that's fantastic. Now, I've heard it said before, and I kind of agree with this notion that most pastors are actually just clean comics. And it sounds like you kind of have that influence in your life from this story. Have you ever considered, I mean, with your public speaking experience, going up and doing a few sets as a comedian?
I do that. I get invited to do banquets, uh, get invited to speak before groups, and I use a lot of comedy. And sometimes I just do strictly comedy, and then I end very seriously. But I love making people laugh, and whenever you're preaching, speaking to people in churches, it's not easy to keep people's attention.
Yeah.
And so I like to follow the format of Jesus, because if you read the Bible, Jesus told a lot of stories,
Yep.
and some of them are humorous too.
Oh, yeah.
So if you want to really captivate people, you need to tell stories, and you need to use humor. But I never back away from telling what the Bible says, but I like to use humor when I do that.
Now, do you think when it comes to the number of people that show up to church, that that has a lot to do with the charisma of the pastor, or is that just the state of things in today's society of, believing in religion as a whole?
I think the pastor is going to be a big part of where people are going to church, and nobody wants to listen to somebody boring.
Yep.
Nobody wants to listen to somebody who is strictly the fire and brimstone and condemning people. I think again, if you read the Bible and you read the way that Jesus captivated people, uh, you know they followed him because of his lifestyle and because of his the message that he was preaching. And the same thing, you know, pastors have to be innovative by sharing God's word. And I think when people go and they see that, but they also look at his life,
Yep.
you know, that's one thing I always knew. I mean, I was on display, man. How I treated the guy in the gas station, and how I treated the people in the grocery stores, and the people that I met in the neighborhood. Somebody's always looking, and you better be a real person and treat people with dignity and respect. And those things are going to touch people, and they will come to they'll come to hear somebody like that, and you can tell the guys that are doing a good job of that, but you can also tell the ones that are doing a pretty bad job.
That's very true. Especially, in today's world of social media and the way news and information and trends, just spread like wildfire. How do you, as a pastor, try to navigate all these cultural issues? I mean, gay marriage is kind of an older one now, but I mean, when that first popped up as a hot button issue, do you try to stay away from these issues more often than not, or is it something you tackle head on? Do you have a real stance on those things?
Oh, absolutely. Well, the Bible's very straightforward on homosexuality, and I don't back away from what the Bible says, but I don't treat people, uh, you know, mean spiritedly. I my wife and I, we have this favorite place that we go and eat, and there was a young lady who obviously was gay, and when she was coming by walking cleaning tables, and I struck up a conversation with her, and I invited her to church, and she said, you wouldn't want me in your church. And I said, why? And she said, because I'm a lesbian. I said, listen, uh, I can tell you that I do want you. You're more than welcome. Matter of fact, if you came, this is exactly what you would see. When I saw you, you'd see me smile. I would come over, I'd give you a hug, I would sit you with my family. And there's nothing in the world that I wouldn't do for you that I would do for anybody else in the church. I would do it for you too. Now then, I don't agree with your lifestyle, but I love you, and I think the best thing that I can do is just to love people and to share with them what God's word says. But ultimately, it's up to God to change their heart. And but I'm not going to back away from any of that. I still think that abortion is taking someone's life, and I'll preach hard against that. But I still love people who have gone through abortions,
Right.
and I've preached on it in church, and I've had women come up to me afterwards in tears saying that they had been through an abortion. I didn't condemn them. I loved them, did everything I could to help them to overcome the horror. But because once they have an abortion, it's rough on those women that have those abortions, and
Absolutely.
so I'm not going to, be condemning of them. I'm going to love them and try to help them the best I can in anything that they need help with.
And I think that's a very, wholesome story with the young waitress. I do think it's a shame, unfortunately, that Ellen DeGeneres has fallen so far from her show that she's waiting tables now. But that's too bad. That's a little joke I thought I'd throw in there.
No, it wasn't Ellen. It wasn't Ellen.
um, Now, what I thought was really interesting from watching you wrestle, actually, this is going to be, I think this is kind of cool. You wrestled, you said you trained under the great Malenko.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
was not aware until you made the connection that I guess I should have been aware, but his son, who I watched wrestle at WCW, is Dean Malenko.
Yep, I actually I trained with Dean, and he has an older brother by the name of Jody, and Jody was actually better than Dean, but Dean,
Okay.
Dean went further in the business. But yeah, Dean was amazing. I worked against him. They call him the man of a thousand holes, and
Yep, yep, that's right.
yeah, he was great. But Jody, one of the roughest matches I ever had in my whole life was against Jody. I mean, Jody was trained not only by his dad, but he was also trained by the great Carl Gotch, and he was one of the best. And I still see Jody every now and then, but he was a tremendous wrestler also. Along, and Dean is now working for AEW.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, he's one of the higher ups in AEW. I've seen him a couple of times in the last year. I've gone to a couple of AEW events, and just said hi to him. His health is not very good.
Oh, well, best wishes to him for sure, hearing that. And actually, after I had heard that you trained with the great Malenko, and that Dean Malenko was his son. It totally made sense when I watched you wrestle because you have a very Malenko style wrestling with all the arm tosses and the hip tosses and the toe drops. It totally clicked once I saw you wrestle and that you wrestled at that school.
Yeah, yeah. Boy, I tell you, Larry, the great Malenko, he was a great trainer. He was a great guy, and he's trained several big names. Bob Orton Jr. was one of them. Mark Mero, who wrestled for WWF, WWE. He wrestled as Marvelous Mark Mero. He wrestled as Johnny B. Bad. He
Now,
was
is he an actual boxer?
he was a what do they call it, Golden Gloves boxer,
That's right. Yeah.
and he was training for the Olympics, and he broke his nose real bad, and was out of boxing for a year, and
Mm.
he never went back to it. He got into professional wrestling, and he was one of the greats too, man. I wish I could do the moves that Mark Mero did. He
Did you
was
ever get to
awesome.
meet? Did you ever get to meet Sable?
No, they were divorced when I got with I guess I've known Mark for the last uh, 14 years. He's one of the greatest guys that I have ever met in professional wrestling. He goes into schools now. He has an organization called Champion of Choices, and he used to do about 250 schools a year.
Wow.
But he goes into schools and talks to kids about making the right choices in life, and he talks a lot about Sable and what happened there, and he's just you just don't meet a lot of guys like Mark Mero. He's one of the best.
Absolutely. Now, sorry to pivot so quickly, but do you do you remember who your first match was? I'm sure you must, but do you remember a lot of memories from your very first match?
Oh, I do. Yeah, my first match was against the grappler Lynn Denton. Matter of fact, I saw him a couple of years ago. It was at Cauliflower Alley, also, and I took my picture over to him and I showed it to him. I said, "You remember working against this guy?" And he said, "Yes, I do." I said, yep, you were my very first match. And I'll never forget, of course, I wasn't working with a mask at that time, but the very first match, I broke my nose in the
Mm,
match. And which was a great thing, because you always worry about injuries and stuff like that.
yeah.
And so that was the first time in the business that I broke my nose. I broke it a bunch of times, but that was the first time. And it really took away all the nervousness and took away anxiety. And it was really a good thing. But he was great to work with, a great wrestler. And I can still remember walking into the ring for the very first time. So I have a lot of great memories.
And that, I mean, how early was that? Like 79, 80?
1979. Yep.
Okay.
1979. Which
Well,
means I'm older. I'm older than dirt, man. You know, Abe Lincoln and I were roommates in college.
well, I meant to ask, you were born in 59,
No, I was born in '54.
54. Okay, same age as my dad. Okay.
Yep.
Do you have very many memories from like the Vietnam era? Does anything stick out from that kind of era?
Yeah, it was a real rough time. I was trying to get into the military at that time. They didn't take colorblind people. I'm really colorblind.
Okay.
Uh, Plus, I have asthma, and they told me I'd probably get killed my first day. So I didn't get to serve in the military. I have the greatest respect for our military veterans, and always honor them and tell them, thank you when I know that they are veterans. But you know, that was a political war, and our guys were really, I think, mistreated once they came home.
Yeah.
It was horrible the way that some of them were treated, and it was a stinking political war. It really was. There was no need for it, And that was a time during protests in colleges, and uh, Kent State and the tragedy that took place there, and then Nixon and all. It was a rough time. It really was, and I was glad when the '70s were over.
Well, it's interesting because I mean, I know I have recency bias and I'm viewing all these things through my own lens, but it kind of feels like a similar time now where we've gone through a couple of pointless wars just since I've been aware. And it kind of seems like there's no good guys, no direction, no heroes. And I know a lot of your theme and the reason you became the saint and the reason you are who you are is because you viewed things through the lens of good versus evil. And you must have had heroes when you were young. So, I mean, was that era kind of confusing that it kind of ruined heroes and ruined your faith for a while, or no?
No, no, not at all. It didn't affect me like that. I had my hero growing up. Excuse me, was a precious African American lady by the name of Miss Edna. She's portrayed in the movie by Diane Carroll, but uh, the movie brings her up to real time. But she was actually from my childhood,
Okay.
and really, she's actually the star of the book because just about every uh, great lesson that I learned, I shared that lesson in the book that I learned from her. And she loved to quote Edmund Burke. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing.
I love that quote.
Yep. And she was an encourager to do something. When I saw something bad happening, you do something to try to change it. And so she was a big influence in my life, and she was a hero. But I had lots of heroes when I was growing up, and that part of the '70s and Vietnam and all, it didn't touch me because um, some of those people are still my heroes.
Okay. And I brought up the good versus evil thing because I saw you were in an interview. I believe I had the channel was his media now. I forget the name of the show. But this was from years ago. Two good looking people were interviewing you about your movie and your faith, and they had asked you, the woman in particular had asked, I'm sorry I forget her name, but she had asked you in particular how you square being a Christian with the world of professional wrestling, and that's how you expressed it was the battle of good versus evil.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. My goodness, if you read the Bible, you're going to see a lot of battles. I mean, King David, lots of battles. He's the guy that killed Goliath.
Yeah.
Uh, and you know that's a story of good versus evil. David against the giant, and you see a lot of that in the Bible, and basically it's still a battle today, of good versus evil. And professional wrestling in my day, it's changed so much. There's a lot of things that have gotten very dark that I do not like. I mean, Vince McMahon in the last years, he took it very dark, and I didn't like that. AEW, they do some dark stuff too, and I don't like that. In my day, you had a good guy versus a bad guy, and usually the good guy won.
Yep.
And
Usually an
so,
American versus a Russian, that always helped.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think, I'd take wrestling in my era over today anytime.
Now I grew up. I mean, you must have really hated the era I grew up with because I grew up with the Attitude Era
Ah,
with
well,
Stone Cold and The Rock and The
yeah,
Godfather. I don't know if you remember him.
yeah. Well, Stone Cold, I was in Texas same time he was there, and when we were in Texas, he had long blonde hair, and he was stunning Steve Austin. He was not Stone Cold. Vince made him Stone Cold.
I think he even
Uh,
went by Steve Williams to some point, right?
uh, Built wise, yeah, but not the
Yeah.
hair. He had blonde hair.
Also, I'm sorry. I thought he went by Steve Williams for a while, and then he changed his name to Steve Austin.
I don't know. I've always known him as Steve Austin, so I don't know. Steve Williams was Dr. Death.
Okay.
So yeah. Uh, but all of those guys. See who else did you name? The Rock. It's a good thing The Rock didn't listen to my advice. I got out of wrestling. I was doing a benefit about 5 years after I retired from wrestling. I was a pastor, and I did a benefit for a lady in my church who had cancer. And the guy that I was going to work against, he said, I need to make sure you can still work. And so he found an independent show over in Tampa, and I went over and we worked against each other in that show. And while we were in the dressing room, in walked, and this is probably 1993. In walked Rocky Johnson, who is the father of The Rock,
Okay.
and also Dwayne Johnson. He had just, I think he had just hadn't been graduated from University of Miami. He played linebacker, for
Yep.
University of Miami. And he had hair, and he wasn't all built up the way he is now. But anyway, I was talking to him. I said, "What are you going to do? You going to play football?" And he said, "No, I'm going to wrestle like my dad." And I said, "You're stupid, man. You ought to wrestle. You ought to play football." And he said, "No, I'm going to wrestle." I said, That's crazy, because I never made the kind of money that they make today in wrestling.
Right.
Uh, we made good money, but nothing like they make today. And so I said, you're crazy, man. You could make a lot of money playing football. And he said, "Nope, I'm going to wrestle like my dad." Well, the next year he went to the WWF, and I think he made $6 million the next year. So it's a
Whew.
great thing. It's a great thing he didn't listen to my advice, uh,
One of the few
because
times you'll ever say that, right?
yeah, because now he's The Rock. He has his own. He's like the number one box office draw, and he has his own production company. And how many movies has that guy been in?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, anyway,
No, it was a scandalous time. I'm kind of surprised sometimes I was allowed to watch it, but that's just the way the '90s was. I don't know if you remember the wrestler Val Venus at all.
say again.
Val Venus.
No, I do not.
Yeah, he was an interesting character himself. It was very of the times of the '90s. But I know that you actually got the chance to wrestle the Undertaker when he was, I believe he was Mean Mark Calloway at the time.
Yeah, he wrestled as Mean Mark before he was the Undertaker, and it was 1988. Uh, Matter of fact, I think it was in March of 1988. So how many years is that? That's a lot of years.
Oh yeah,
Uh, but he didn't have all the tattoos, he didn't have the long hair, and he didn't have the makeup and all. But he was still 6'8", and he was still 315 pounds. But we had a great match. I just thoroughly loved working with him. He's great at that. And my goodness, this guy had a 3-decade career in
yeah.
professional wrestling. So he is. There's nobody that could really, I think, top uh, his time in professional wrestling. Not even Ric Flair. Uh,
Yeah, I was gonna bring up the Nature Boy.
yeah, yeah. I think Mark just has an unprecedented career that's never going to be matched again, I don't think.
Now, did you end up taking his infamous heart punch?
Uh, no, he did at that time he did the Hulk Hogan leg thing, where he bounces off the ropes, goes up in the air, and brings the leg down over your throat. That
Okay,
one.
and
So
that's
that
not,
was it.
so that was towards the end of your career, right?
Yeah, yeah, that was my last year in wrestling,
Did you
1988.
did you ask him to take it easy on you, or is that not a thing in wrestling?
Oh no, no, I didn't. I didn't say a word. I didn't talk to him before the match. Uh, because in those days, you know, the bad guys were in one dressing room and the good guys were in a different dressing room.
Oh, okay.
And a lot of times you didn't even know who you were going to work against until you got there.
Wow.
Everything has changed. Everything has changed. And, you just did the match in the ring. There was no choreograph, or there was nothing like that. You just went in the ring and worked.
Was it around that same time you worked with the Ultimate Warrior?
Yeah, it was a little before that.
Okay.
That guy he was an animal, man. He was an animal. He was not fun to work with.
I've heard Kevin Nash describe him as a little out there personality wise. Was he like that when you knew him?
Yep. 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 Yep.
But he was
Oh,
he was wrestling under the name Dino Warrior, maybe?
yeah, the Dingo Warrior.
Oh, the Dingo
Dingo.
Warrior. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think steroids changed professional wrestling um, so much. When I was in wrestling, I had a guy tell me, he said, blow your body up, I'll make a star out of you. And I said, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but putting something in your body like that can affect your muscles. Your heart is also a muscle.
Right.
And it just, I haven't seen good things come of that. And so I never took those steroids, but I worked against guys who took steroids, and it was not fun because uh, I don't know, it just made a different personality out of them.
Well, and that's part of why I think your story is so wholesome and enjoyable is because all we really hear as fans more often than not are the bad stories, the ones that go wrong, the Chris Benoit's, the Von Erichs, the really infamous ones, So it is nice to hear a guy get through it, and not only get through it, but get through it as a shining, husband, father, and pastor as well.
Yeah, yeah. I just saw the movie about the Von Erichs called The Iron Claw.
Okay, I was going to ask you if you were planning on watching that.
Yeah, I watched it. It's very dark. I did not like the movie. Uh, I don't think it really left you encouraged when you walked out.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, you know, that family went through so much tragedy. Right before I went to Texas, David died in Japan. While I was there, Mike took his life. I left, and of course, the younger brother Chris is not even mentioned in the movie. They act like he didn't even exist in the movie.
hmm.
He took his life. Kerry took his life. So that family just dealt with a lot of tragedy, and it's very very sad, and breaks my heart for them. But I hear Kevin's doing good, and I'm glad for that. He's got a couple of boys that are in wrestling, and they look great. So I guess they're going to carry on that Von Erich tradition.
Okay. Yeah, it is sad. It's really too bad. I know a lot of people looked up to, in my age in particular. I mean, Chris Benoit was such a performer, so to see his story was very sad. And
Yes, it was.
but I guess you were mentioning as sort of along the same lines. You were mentioning that a guy who portrayed Doink the Clown at one point was going to be at this event in Ohio.
Yeah, Steve Kern. Steve Kern. He wrestled as Skinner.
Okay.
Also for the WWE, he was Skinner. He wrestled as Doink the Clown. Uh, but he was a great tag team with. I was trying to remember his tag team partner, but just a good-looking guy and a great guy too. He's one of the greats in the business.
Well, I bring him up kind of along those same storylines with what we were just talking about because I believe his name was Matt Bourne, originally
Yeah.
played Doink.
Yep. Matt
And
Bourne.
I'd
Yeah.
seen him wrestle Hacksaw Jim Duggan at some high school gym event that's on YouTube, and it was really unfortunate to see because of what those guys were at the peaks of their career. I mean, how often is that story? The guys who just go for a little too long. Have you seen that too often in your life?
Oh, it's still going on, man. It's still
Yeah,
going on.
yeah,
Yeah, Ric Flair got back in the ring just what was it, last week for Sting's retirement match, and uh, it's time for Rick to hang it up. He doesn't need to be in the ring anymore. But there's guys that, continue working long after they should be working, and that's sad. But here's the thing, and I'm going to tell you this, Dylan. I'll put it out there. I've offered to be the chaplain for WWE. I've offered to be the chaplain for AEW. I and gotten no response because those guys need somebody, because you're getting young guys are making a lot of money, doing things to their body they shouldn't be doing. And then they make all of this money, and then when they're washed up and they can't do it anymore, they don't have a pot to pee in or a window to throw it out of.
Yeah.
So they just waste their life. And there's so many wrestlers, so many professional football players, basketball players that make all of that money, and they just blow it away, and they have nothing to show for it. And sadly, I think that happens more in professional wrestling than any other place.
Yeah, I know that was part of, what was portrayed in the movie The Wrestler as well. It seemed like Mickey Rourke just all the bad things that would pile on top of each other. And again, that's why I appreciate your movies, because it gives you the other side of wrestling and what it can be if you follow a certain path. So again, I
Yep,
appreciate you writing the book and making the movie. It's just
yep.
fantastic.
Well,
Uh,
if you want to know what independent wrestling, a lot of independent wrestling is, that movie, The Wrestler, portrayed that. I mean, it was spot on in a lot of stuff.
Even
Really
somewhat,
was.
I don't know if you watched the movie Ready to Rumble with David Arquette.
No, I have not.
That was about more focused on the WCW at the height of that time. But yeah, that the lead wrestler in that one, his name was Jimmy the King, and they kind of find him, at his trailer in some RV camp, and his wife's left him, and his kid doesn't know who he is, and all that stuff. So yeah, that seems like the common theme for what people perceive wrestlers as, and it's too unfortunate. And again, that's
Yeah.
why your work sticks out.
Yeah, that could have been me if my life revolved completely around wrestling, but it didn't. When I was in professional wrestling, I was married. I have two daughters that I love with all my heart, who are probably older than you, Dylan. How old are you?
I'm 33.
33. Yeah, I got socks older than you, man. But my oldest daughter is 44. My youngest daughter is 41, and they are godly young women, that still are strong women of faith. They're great moms. They're great wives, and they're great daughters. And when I was in wrestling, I just wanted to make sure that I was a good dad and a good husband. And I didn't go to the bars and the strip clubs afterwards. When I got through with wrestling, I went home to a wife and two little girls, and did all I could to try to provide for them and to make sure that they had stability in their lives. So I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. You know,
Did
stardom
your
stardom doesn't hold a candle to being a good dad.
Yeah, that's very true. I know you mentioned your kids got to see you. At least one of your daughters got to watch you wrestle Mark Calloway, and that was kind of a tough experience for her, watching Dad get beat up.
Yeah, yeah. There's a story about that in the book where I had already wrestled that night, and I was taking my boots off, and the promoter came in. Excuse me. The promoter came in and said, the guy who was going to work against Mark didn't show up, and they needed somebody to work against him. And I volunteered. I knew this kid was going to be a star. And so I sent the referee out. This was a Friday night. And on Friday nights, my family they usually came and watched me wrestle. And then after I wrestled, we would go out and do Friday night fun night as a family. And so I had to send the referee out to tell my wife not to go to the car, because they usually gave me enough time to get a shower and get dressed, and they'd meet me in the parking lot, and then we would go. So the referee went out and found my wife and told her, don't leave, because Chris is going to wrestle again. And I said, don't tell him who I'm working against. So anyway, I got in the ring and I found my wife and girls, and the lights went down and Mark walked in. And when he did, I looked at, both my little girls were crying when they saw him. And my wife, her eyes got really big and she was frantically going through her purse. And so that night after the match, and we're driving back to Fort Worth, Texas, and I looked over at her and I said, "Hey, right before the match started, I saw you grab your purse and you were going through it like crazy. What was that about?" And she said, "Oh, she said, I was looking for the checkbook to make sure you'd paid the insurance."
She knew you were gonna have a slip disc that night.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, is he kind of more or less who the Reaper character is based on, or is that just kind of out of thin air?
You know, I wrestled a kid called the Grim Reaper. I
Okay.
mentioned him. I mentioned him in the book, and I guess the movie people really liked that name, and so they came up with that character in the movie. But when they were filming it, and I met the young man that plays the Reaper. His name is James Preston Rogers. He was a former WWE wrestler, but he was making more money making movies, and so he got out of wrestling, and that's all he does now is make movies. But when I saw him, I said, "Man, you look like a young Undertaker,"
He's a
because he
big
looked
guy.
just, yeah, he looked just like him. But he was a great guy and did a great job.
Even the actor who portrays you is in tremendous shape.
Yep, his name is Brett Grandstaff, and Brett was actually he was into MMA, and he was in great shape, and he trained with James Preston Rogers for, I don't know, about 7 or 8 weeks before the filming, and he did all of his stunts except for three of them in the movie. So he
Wow.
was he was he was in good shape, and he did a good job in the ring. But there were three things in the movie that he didn't do that they had a stunt man do.
That's really awesome. He's like his own Tom Cruise that no one even knows about.
Yeah.
I know you said so. The man who produced the movie, he actually also produced the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies, correct?
No, no, that was the very first guy that talked to me was Kim Dawson, and Kim Dawson was the executive producer of the very first three Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies that were all blockbusters.
Yep.
And then he made a movie with Jim Caviezel called Stroke of Genius, the Bobby Jones story.
Okay.
And then he made a faith-based movie called Letters to God. And so he was very interested in the Masked Saint, and he kept me on the hook for about a year. They actually had a script written, but then all of a sudden one day he just says, "No, I don't want to do it anymore." But during that time, I was able to meet other people in the movie business, and this producer flew down from Canada and met me at Disney World, and he eventually is the one who produced the movie. His name is Cliff McDowell,
Oh, okay.
and but he's a movie producer in Ontario, Canada.
Now, when you're looking for actors for a Christian film, I mean, does it play any significance in the cast, like who you select, or not really?
I had nothing to do with that. I
Okay.
think the lady who was the casting director, I think her name is Beverly Holloway. She does a lot of faith based films, but she did a great job. When she lined up Rowdy Roddy Piper to play the part of the promoter, man, she hit a home run with that one, and she just did a great job with you know finding all the people to be in that movie. She did a super job.
Yeah. What was it like meeting and working with Roddy?
I had worked against him 25 years before the movie, and I said, "Hey, he won't remember me." And but first time I saw him, it was like I saw him the first time. He was a tremendous wrestler. Uh, but he was also a tremendous actor. He did a great job. If you IMDb him, uh, just look at the list of stuff that he did. It was amazing. Of course, he made that cult film They Live,
Mm.
and most people know him for that. But he was great actor, great wrestler, and he was a great family man too.
Yeah, I know you mentioned he never took his wedding ring off, right?
Right? Yeah, he always worked with his wedding ring on. Always.
That's great. Now, in that same interview where the woman had asked you about how you square wrestling with your faith, you also there was an interesting story about, and I only am curious about this because I'm interested in politics as well, and I was listening to Rush Limbaugh as well toward the end of his life, so I was just curious about the whole Rush Limbaugh story and what happened there and how that played out.
Yep. Well, I absolutely loved Rush Limbaugh, and that might cut off a bunch of your listeners right now. That didn't like him, but um, he was an entertainer. Everybody talked about how arrogant he was. I said, I was in professional wrestling for 10 years. Don't talk to me about arrogance. But that was his gimmick. That was his gimmick. He did
Yep.
that to irritate the liberals. But he was just a great commentator. I loved his shows, and he did some guy called into his show one day and said he wanted to get his newsletter, but his wife wouldn't let him. And at that time, Bill Clinton was the president, and there were school kids that were doing fundraisers to help with the deficit.
Mm.
And Rush was talking about how stupid that is because there's no way to touch the deficit. And so he said to the guy wanting the newsletter, he said, "Well, you need to do a bake sale and raise the money for the newsletter." And so he started a bake sale, and it just kind of gathered legs. And when he finally did this bake sale, there were like 100,000 people that showed up, and Rush Limbaugh himself showed up, and it was just an unbelievable event. And so I got the idea. The place where we were living at that time, uh, we couldn't get Rush on the radio. Uh, there were none of the local stations that were carrying him, and so I said, you know what? I'm going to do a wrestling event, try to raise money, and buy a radio station and put Rush Limbaugh on. And so I did that, and it took off, man. People were calling me, and they did a big article in the St. Pete Times. And when that article came out, I found out how many Democrats I had in my church,
Yeah, I guess so.
and I almost got fired because of it. And they even contacted Rush Limbaugh and his show, and it was quite an event. I wouldn't change anything. I'd still do it again if I could, but it didn't work out, and we didn't, buy the radio station. But it was certainly an event that got a lot of talk.
It's too bad, when just who you like politically or your certain views politically can affect your peers so much in that way. Just a radio host that you happen to like. It really stinks to hear that story.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, brother, I tell you, it's a deal breaker. I had a great friend in wrestling who was, if I told you all the accolades, you'd probably know who it was. But I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to say his name, but uh, he actually was staying in my home, and we were just talking. He asked to hear one of my sermons, and I played one of my sermons, and um, he all of a sudden he's not answering my text and not answering my calls, and one day I just sent him a text and I said, "Hey man, what's up?" And he finally answered me, and he said, "Well, I gathered from finally spending time with you that you are a conservative and you probably voted for Donald Trump, and that's a deal breaker with me." And he didn't know anything about my politics. He just assumed everything, and he made that a deal breaker. You know, I I've got people that I know vote for people that I don't vote for,
Yeah.
but that's not a reason to not be friends with somebody, you know.
No, not
And
at all. And
but
unfortunately, sorry.
but that's the era that we live in now. I mean, you know, Trump's been out of office for 3 years, and I've never seen a candidate uh, that has been attacked like he has. I mean, he's been indicted 4 times,
Yeah,
and all and it's politically motivated. And so we live in a very politically volatile time, and you have people on both sides that it's a deal breaker if you don't agree with the way I agree with, and it's just sad how things have become.
absolutely. It's something about his election, and especially with the pandemic came on, it really broke a lot of people's brains. And there's a lot of, social media has kind of been a catalyst to that as well. I know there's a particular wrestler that I'm thinking of that would complain about Donald Trump all the time, and that was Kevin Nash. And that really threw me off because I grew up watching, Diesel, big sexy Kevin Nash, thinking he was just Mr. Cool Guy and nothing could throw him. So to see him just ranting and raving every day about a politician was really an eye opener.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so yeah, to see
Yeah.
that, and just I'm hoping that we're kind of healing from those wounds, after all is said and done. But now we're gonna have this election rematch again, so I'm worried that the scars and all those things are gonna get reopened, and we're gonna go back to red versus blue attacking each other. But I have hope that the mainstream media, as they're called, the drive-by media, as Rush would call them, I'm hoping that people are starting to pursue different outlets and really start to understand that we don't need to be so aggressive and at each other's throats all the times about opinions. At the base level, we all just want to be safe and happy and give the best opportunity for our kids to thrive. And I think if we all just start there, we'll be better off.
Yeah. Well, I I do not watch the news, man.
Yeah.
I don't watch the news, and I don't read the paper. I have my own sources of where I find news, and I want to make sure that it's reliable and all. But I'm thankful. I'm thankful for the internet because it it showed mainstream media that they're not the only ones that can do this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Do you have a favorite president?
A favorite president?
Yeah.
Um, my favorite president was Ronald Reagan. I love
Okay.
Reagan. And my second favorite was Donald Trump. I loved him. I was in professional wrestling. His arrogance doesn't bother me. Um, you know, it, why I liked him is I've never had a president who made promises keep those promises. He's the only president that ever did that. You
Yeah, it
know,
does
he
seem that way with a lot of things. Absolutely.
yeah, he kept his promises. He was the most he was the biggest supporter of evangelical Christianity in my lifetime. He was the most pro-life president in my lifetime, and he was the most pro-Israel president in my lifetime. And just for those reasons, I was very supportive of him. Did I agree with his lifestyle and some of the things he did? No, I didn't. But I wasn't voting for a pastor. I was voting for somebody who could run the country. And he was an outsider. He was not a politician, and that's why he's hated so much. You look at these politicians who've been in there, like Biden's been in there his whole life,
Yeah,
and
pretty much.
we know how much money they make as politicians, but yet Biden is now a multi millionaire. Where'd he get that money? Where do these politicians get the money that they got? Uh, Trump was the only guy that went in and was poorer when he got out than what he got in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay. You probably won't put this show on because of my last statements.
No, not at all. We're in
Uh,
election year. I wanted to go down this road. Absolutely.
yeah.
It's going to
Okay.
be on TV for the next until until election day, and even then, I know everyone. That's the
Uh,
thing about the media is they can pretend they don't like Trump, but they plaster him all over their pages. If you go to CNN, if you go to MSNBC, every other video says Trump this and Trump that because they love the ratings. So
yeah. Yeah.
they have to argue with that.
Yeah. Yep. That's for sure.
Now, when it comes back to your faith, I mean, is that I know you actually wanted to clear up something. I know you mentioned Arena, that the movie portrays you as starting off as kind of a bad preacher, and then you got better over time. But you're actually a pretty good preacher, you say.
Yeah, they did that. I guess they did that for humor's sake, but I was never as bad of a speaker as they portrayed him at the beginning. And I never had a choir that sounded that bad either. Oh, that choir, it was terrible. But
I was going to
they
mention the choir.
yeah, they did a couple things for humor's sake, I think. But no, I was always a good speaker, not a bad speaker.
And did you have what was your finishing move? Did you ever polish together a finishing move?
Yeah, mine was a sleeper hold.
Okay, just like Roddy.
Yeah, yeah, put them to sleep, man.
Because when I was and the interesting thing is too, I was watching your interview with, I believe his name was Milo Beasley.
Uh-huh.
You were mentioning, and this really surprised me because he asked you if wearing the mask was cumbersome, and I was absolutely expecting you to say yes. I was having to shift it all the time because I've seen other guys have to shift their mask around, but you said it came second nature to you.
Yeah, I had no problem with it. Matter of fact, you know, I would feel naked to get back into the ring without it. But I took to it very easily. Mine fit perfect because it was handmade by my sister. So uh, I guess for that reason, it fit me so well. And, I never had to readjust it. It just stayed on there. And I never had a problem with it. And, it just, I don't know. It was just something that I took to. I didn't have a problem with it and really enjoyed working with the mask.
Now, I was watching your wrestling match. It might have been your last ever wrestling match against Prince Tanaka. I believe it was for your church.
Uh, that, that was actually a benefit that I did against Prince Anaka. Yeah. And they put the ring on the 50-yard line
Yep.
and they probably had 1,000 chairs on the field, and then plus the people in the stadium. They didn't fill the stadium, but it was a great crowd there. But it was pretty awesome to get back in the ring after being out of wrestling for 5 years.
Oh, and I wanted to give a shout out to your wife too, because I believe she joined you at ringside as kind of your manager there.
Oh, no, that was actually a lady from the local radio station that was doing that.
Doing the commentary.
Oh, no, that was Dory Funk Jr.'s wife that was doing the commentary.
Okay. She was,
Dory
I mean,
Funk,
I'll be honest, she was fantastic. I'd love to hear her call more wrestling matches.
yeah, yeah. Her name is Marty Funk.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
So
she
that,
did that.
and that was not your wife at ringside.
No, 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 no.
Okay.
My wife is a shy lady. Doesn't want to be, put me in the background. Leave me alone. No,
Gotcha.
yeah.
And the reason the mask question came up, and because I thought you were shifting it, but must be you just got poked in the eye during the match.
Yeah, that's possible. You have those. Your vision to a certain extent is impaired a little bit, and so it's possible to take an elbow to the eye or a finger to the eye or whatever. So yeah, those things happen, but that wasn't the norm.
Do you happen to remember what prompted the two referee stipulation there?
Uh,
I just remember
I
for
don't.
whatever reason they had two referees, and the one told the other at the end of the match that Tanaka had cheated by using the ropes to roll you up.
Oh. No, he was just. No, they had one referee for the match, but the guy that was reffing that match didn't see something take place, and the other referee came in and told him about it. That was it.
And that small package roll up, that was not, that just kind of was on the fly, nothing that was discussed.
Oh no, all of that's prearranged. You know who's going to win. You know who's going to lose.
I just
And
wasn't sure if he. Oh, sorry. I just wasn't sure if he was aware you were going to do the small package roll up.
nah, that everybody knew what was going to take place.
Gotcha.
Yeah, yeah.
What did you? I mean, as far as foreign objects and things like that, did you ever take a chair to the face or thumbtacks, anything like that?
Oh, yeah. I've taken a chair over the head. I have a nice crack in my skull that I'm running my finger down right now.
Wow.
That happened from a steel chair. So, yeah, you have those. I I took I told you all my injuries, didn't I? I think
Yeah,
I
and
did.
I don't think you mentioned it, but I know you said before that Bruiser Brody gave you a concussion.
Yeah, that was I think the last concussion that I got in professional wrestling was from him. Yeah, because when he kicked you in the head, he kicked you in the head. It,
Goodness.
I don't even know how I got home that night.
Was there? I mean, I know in sports, like in football in particular, I mean, guys will try to take like a week off for concussions, but that probably wasn't a thing for you. I mean, you're getting back in the ring no matter what.
I had over 100 concussions. I had get a concussion one night and wrestle the next night. That was never anything that stopped you. It's amazing to me when I see professional football players and basketball players how they take them out of a game for the certain injuries, and I chuckle at it. I broke two ribs in Dallas and worked the next night, so
Wow.
I didn't have a lot of sympathy. In my day, if you didn't work, there was somebody behind you that was really hoping to get a break. And, if you didn't want to work, there's somebody that wanted to work in your place. And so you better not, uh, miss because you might not get the opportunity again. And so you just learn to work with injuries. I was in a match one time. I didn't get to warm up before I got there. I was running late and I had to get dressed and get right in the ring, and I pulled a groin in the first 20 seconds of the match.
Oh.
And but yet we were supposed to go 20 minutes, and so I had to go 20 minutes with a pulled groin. That was just it, you know. I injured my knee in a match, and I kept going. Concussions, you keep going. Broke nose, you keep going. Broke fingers, you keep going. You just learn to deal with the pain.
Do you happen to remember? And I'm sorry, it's kind of a dark event to bring up, but I'm just curious. Do you happen to remember where you were, or were you watching wrestling the night that Owen Hart passed away?
I had actually I really wasn't watching wrestling as much in those days, but that was actually a pay-per-view event, I think. And I didn't watch the pay-per-view. I watched afterwards what took place, and it was tragic. The Hearts are great people. I mean, great, great people. And that was a tragedy. Um, you know, Something like that should have never happened. And it's tragic that it did. But my heart goes out to the heart people because they have dealt with a lot of tragedy.
Yeah, and that was, that was one of the more admirable things about Brett was he tried to make it, and even though his nickname was the Hitman, he tried to make it clear that he wanted to be a role model for all the kids that were watching. So that was a very
Yeah,
respectable thing about him.
yeah, yeah. Bret Hart's great, great guy, man, great guy.
And you also got to, I don't want to miss out on anyone here because I know you mentioned that Ron Simmons was one of your favorite Seminoles. You got to work with Ron Simmons?
Yeah, actually, worked on a an ECW show with him. Uh, and Ron Simmons, man, I tell you, that guy was an unbelievable nose tackle for the Florida State Seminoles, and he played some pro football afterwards. I think he played in the Canadian League, and he played the last 3 years of the USFL the first time. And then he got into professional wrestling, and he was great at it. He was a great professional wrestler, and he looks good now, man. I just saw him a couple of years ago at an event, and went up to him, and I showed him a picture of me and him from that ECW match, and got to talk to him quite a bit. And he's still in great shape, man. I think he can get back in the ring today, but he really was a great guy.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. And I know he worked for a while with a guy who I believe has kind of a reputation as a more difficult wrestler to work with in Bradshaw. Did you ever work with anyone like that who was just kind of a straight up bully in the ring?
Uh, I think of who you're talking about is Butch Reed. I think he worked with Butch Reed, and Butch Reed was kind of he was a little bit that way. But yeah, the great thing about being trained by the great Malenko is he taught you how to do everything, and he warned you. He said, "Listen, you're gonna be in matches with somebody who will try to take advantage of you, and if you let them take advantage of you, they will continue to take advantage of you. So you better be able to protect yourself. You better be able to uh, make sure that they don't want to try that again." And so, yeah, you had guys in the business like that, but fortunately, there weren't a lot of them.
Yeah, that was kind of the interesting thing going back to Matt Bourne. And I won't keep you too much longer. Sorry, but this is going kind of along here. You've been very generous with your time. That was the interesting thing, seeing a lot of Matt Bourne's old videos when he was in his younger days before Doink the Clown. It seemed like he would test a lot of guys, and some matches would end in disqualifications more often than not.
Yeah, well, it's just sad what his life turned out. That's sad, and I hate that. But you know, the only person that you can account for is yourself,
Yep.
and so you have to deal with all of the crap in life and do the best that you can to make it a better world, and that's what I try to do.
What was it like to make that cameo appearance in the movie and shout out for yourself to go get him, Saint?
Well, it was a little bit um, it was a little bit difficult, to just do one stinking line in the movie, and they probably did 3 takes on it. And I
I was
thought,
going to
man,
ask.
yeah, I thought, golly, I thought the first time was okay, but evidently not. But yeah, that was kind of neat. I was so blessed. They actually, my wife has a cameo in the movie, and my youngest daughter and her husband have a cameo in the movie.
Okay.
So uh, it was quite a treat to be on the scene and to experience all of that. It really was. I was very blessed.
Were they also in the crowd during the cage match scene?
Uh, no, when they did wrestling at a different time, my wife was still teaching at the time, and so was my daughter, and so they could only be gone for a week. So they had to go home.
Gotcha.
So they actually weren't there when they were filming the wrestling part. But you know, I have characters from my childhood that I always put in my books, and the character of the detective Harper. Um, Harper was actually my best friend growing up, and he was he and his wife were there for the filming of the wrestling, and he's got a cameo. Nobody knows who it is because he's my best friend, but but he's at ringside, and every time I see him, he says, I never got paid for all those cameos on there." Uh, it was something else to look up there and see him on there, but I had a good time.
Now, just to close up here, in the interviews that I've seen with you, you've sort of teased and mentioned here and there a Math Saint 2, a sequel to the book. Is that something that's still in progress, or are we moved on to as Mr. President and the holiday movies taking up most of your time?
Well, I'd love to see a Mass Saint 2. There's been some talk of that. There's also talk of a Mass Saint series. The series are really big now on Prime and Netflix and Paramount and everything else.
Oh yeah.
So, I'm not going to put my heart out there for it. If it happens, it happens. But the book, Mr. President, Mike McClaskey, who was my co-author on there, we actually wrote that for Hulk Hogan a long time ago. We wrote a script for Hulk Hogan, and he didn't take it. But amazingly, he did an interview like 6 months later, and he talked about running for president. And then, so then we changed. Then we were going to do it for The Rock, and we got the script to The Rock, and he didn't do it. But amazingly, 6 months later, in an interview, he said he was going to run for president. So I think they like the idea. They just don't like they don't like something about it. But anyway,
it seems like you're planting the seed.
Yeah, I think Mr. President would make a great movie. I really do. And
I hope it comes out.
Yeah, I do too. So we'll see.
Well, Chris, Dr. Whaley, Pastor Whaley, Mr. Whaley, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I mean, I know we didn't discuss this beforehand, but I really was a huge wrestling fan when I was a kid. I mean, I have the T-shirts, the action figures, the DVD sets. I mean, I was really into it. So to hear your story, and I know my mother-in-law, especially with she goes to church every Sunday down here with us. And I know she's going to enjoy that part of it. So to bring these two worlds together was really fantastic for me. And I just truly appreciate you giving me your time. And again, another shout out to Rena Friedman Watts of the Better Call Daddy podcast.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dillon, for having me. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me, you have any questions or anything, I'm not your normal person because I love response and I love getting back to people who have questions. So I have a website. It's called themasksaint.com, and that's MASKED, themasksaint.com. Or you can go to mrpresidentbook.com, and my contact info is there also. If you want to watch the movie, it's on Prime Video now. You can watch it on Prime. You can watch it on Tubi, or you can watch it on PureFlix. And of course, all the books are available on Amazon. And some Books A Millions carry them, but the best bet Amazon.
And the book's also the Masked Saint is also available at themasksaint.com.
Yep. If you want an autographed copy, yeah, you can do that.
Oh, great. That's awesome. Well, Chris Whaley, the Masked Saint, aka the Saint, thank you so much again, and I will be ending the recording right now.